What is up? Will here with Rennthusiast, my YouTube channel about Porsche ownership, and in today's video I'm going to give you 7 tips for getting the most enjoyment out of your Porsche ownership. This video is based on my experience over the past 6 years owning, 12 or 14 Porsches. I don't have the heart to go back and look, only because it's an expensive hobby. Anyway, this video, these tips are based on things that have worked for me and, quite frankly, some mistakes that I've made or some things that haven't worked for me. So if you are a first-time Porsche buyer especially, I hope you'll find some value in the information I'm getting ready to share with you. If this is your first time here, please subscribe. This is the type of video I do, give you guys like actionable, usable tips based on my own open, honest, authentic experience. Let us now get into the first tip. The first tip I'm going to give you may seem very, very obvious. I've talked about this before in videos, and I guess maybe those videos haven't been as widely watched, but I think it's one that is often overlooked. And this is based on notes, emails, messages I get from viewers out there talking to me about pursuing their very first Porsche, but they neglect to set the goal or goals for the garage they're trying to put together. So maybe there's somebody who want to have multiple Porsches, or maybe they're just in a position where they're looking for their first Porsche. I think that oftentimes people fall in love with Instagram pictures and this notion of the Porsche lifestyle, and they think that a particular shape of 911 is gorgeous and they just have to have that. I think maybe they neglect to think through what the ownership is going to actually be like and whether or not it meets what they're trying to achieve. So let me give you an example. Let's say somebody really wants to drive their Porsche. Like, part of what they seek from their experience of owning one of these cars is really driving it hard on back roads. And so, you know, they then go and they buy an immaculate, low mileage, super expensive, condition 1 car. They didn't necessarily think through their goal of driving the hell out of it on back roads and getting chips and patina and all that good stuff. They didn't really play the tape forward when they sought that really immaculate example. And so they find themselves in a position, and I've been there too, where the car arrives and it's awesome, but it holds them hostage because their real goal was to use the car. And so tip number 1, really sit down, think through the goals that you have for your ownership experience. I continue to get notes from people who are skipping this particular tip. Second tip I'd give you, do not underestimate the cost of this hobby. I think we all come into it knowing that Porsches aren't cheap. I understand that it's an elite hobby and very expensive, and I know the type of people that own them. They're very wealthy typically. That's okay. Like, on the surface, that I think new owners know that. I knew that. But early on for me, especially like with my first 993, I bought the car. It showed up. It needed a few things, and as I recall, it was like $5,400, just kind of things that needed to get done to get the car roadworthy. And I was shocked because, yeah, I knew it was an expensive hobby, but I didn't realize just how much. If you are a longer time viewer, then you know, man, that I have documented what it's cost me, what it's been like to sort through cars that I buy. I would say this just to make sure you're in the financial position to be able to support these cars. They are, for the most part, reliable once you sort them. They're pretty bulletproof. They can take a flogging. I don't want to underplay that part of them. They are great cars, well engineered for the most part, but you know, they still, when repairs come along, they cost money. And so coming into this thing, just know it. A real practical tip that I'll give you is that if you have a budget in mind for your first Porsche, I would say set aside 10 to 20% of the purchase price for repairs, deferred maintenance, and then hopefully modifications that you want to make. And I'll give you a tip about modifications a little bit later at the end of this video, but set aside 10 to 20% and hope you don't have to spend it. So for example, let's say you have $100,000 in mind that you're willing to spend on your Porsche. Only spend 80, okay? Don't go all the way up to 100 because you're gonna get popped. So I know for me, I underestimated just how expensive it was, and I got, you know, pissed off on my second, third, fourth cars when they just bled my wallet dry. So that's the second tip. Third, this is an interesting one. So I came into this thing as an air-cooled loyalist, man. I loved and still love like the involvement of driving those cars. I love the vibe of the cars. I love the culture around the cars. But early on, I was very judgmental of any non-air-cooled. Like, I was frankly a jerk. I was never rude to people, but I always just kind of had these inside jokes with guys of like, oh, water-cooled cars, super easy to drive. They're not real Porsche owners. Like, I mean, it was just not cool, because now, fast forward, I have owned a couple of water-cooled cars. I currently own a 981 Spider and a Carrera T, a 2024, and I love those cars. And I look back and I'm just thinking, man, I was a fool. I was just so close-minded and so judgmental. Whether or not you want to follow this tip is fine. I mean, it doesn't necessarily, it's neither here nor there if you do it. But I guess what I have found is my appreciation for different generations and Porsche heritage and all that has grown. And so I guess the tip there is don't be closed-minded. Okay, so the next tip is don't blindly trust the wrong people in this hobby. And so here's what I mean. And I want to be careful with this, because I have had some negative kind of pissed off content of mine over the course of the past few years, just because I'm human and I give you guys an authentic sense for what it's like to own these cars, even when it goes bad. But I fell into this trap of thinking, hey, in this community, we're all in it together and everybody wants to be positive, because that's been my experience with this community, is generally everybody is positive. But hey, all sellers are honest and these guys are brokers and consigners, and they would never sell a problem car because they are just like, they're gentlemen or whatever it is. And there are some great sellers out there. There are some wonderful consigners, brokers, dealers out there. So I want to be very clear about that. But there are also some unscrupulous people that are looking to cash in on the fever that has happened over the past few years. And there are also dealers who are who are charging, like I'm talking about Porsche factory dealers who are charging, market rates of $10,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 over sticker. At least they're looking you in the eye when they're screwing you. But I blindly trusted the wrong people in the community to provide me with cars when maybe I should have been a little bit more skeptical. So don't fall into that trap. Like, be cool. Be trusting, but also just protect yourself. Don't just assume that anybody out there who's in this community is looking out for your best interests. Okay, this next tip is something that I have a ton of experience with, and here it is, like, try not to be too perfectionistic about the condition you want your cars to be in, unless you're a next level elite owner who doesn't care how much money you have to spend. And so, like, I have gotten in way too deep in several of my cars. For example, I had an ice green metallic 76 911S, had a 3.2 motor in it. It was awesome. I went in way too deep on that car for a couple of reasons. First of all, I naively believed that this was gonna be my forever 911 and it would be the one that I take to all these rallies, and so I wanted everything gone through. And frankly, I fixed things that didn't need to be fixed, and I lost my ass on that car. So I would say that if you're a newcomer to the hobby specifically, think about what do you need to get by with. When you're working with a mechanic, the mechanic's gonna say, they're gonna give you every single little thing that needs to be repaired on the car, like your headliner's sagging a little bit. Do you really, really need to get into however much that's gonna cost, because it won't be cheap, just to get it to stick to the ceiling? Or is that something that you can live with because really you're just gonna drive the car? So I would just say, if you are somebody who cares about where you are in a Porsche financially, you want it to at least be able to sell it and walk away with the money you put into it, don't go too deep like I have. All right, the next tip I would say to you is don't get too caught up in your emotions when you're buying. I just did a video on the emotional roller coaster of buying a Porsche remotely, especially your first Porsche. And this bit about not getting caught up in your emotion is particularly applicable in that scenario if you are buying your first one remotely. It is really, really easy to fall in love with the idea of owning one of these cars, looking at pictures, thinking about how sexy it's gonna be, thinking about how you're gonna be like Magnus Walker and really cool and underground. That will cloud your vision and cost you money and heartache. What I mean by that is you start to overlook red flags or yellow flags. As I said to you a moment ago, you start to trust people that maybe don't feel 100% honest, or at least not 100% forthright. I would say for me, I've fallen into that trap. I've been rather naive, rather trusting in this world. I try to do no harm. I'm an honest person. I work very, very hard at that. It's an important core value of mine, and so therefore I assume that other people want to do that kind of thing, and it just never occurs to me that maybe they're not looking out for my best interests. That has cost me a lot of money and aggravation, and that's been a whole thing in and of itself. It's on my channel, you'll see if you go back through some of my videos. So anyway, the tip is do not get too caught up in emotion when buying. All right, last tip. And this is one that I see, it's funny, I see it a lot in the 993 community. Somebody buys their first air-cooled Porsche, they've decided it's gonna be a 993, they get their hands on it, it's awesome, they don't have any real experience owning one of these cars, they immediately dig into the car and start to like modify it according to what all the guys in the Facebook groups say you gotta do, and the forums, and all the guys on YouTube like me, that tell you what you got to do. Like, just my tip for you is just don't do that, because it could be that you get into the car too deep, you do some things to it that don't necessarily make sense, you don't really know how the car performs stock, so you're not sure like what you want to modify on it, or you fall in love with what Magnus Walker, again, I don't mean to pick on him, but what he's doing with his cars, and you think you got to do that too, and then you do it, and then a month later you're looking at your interior that you did and you're like, why did I do that? These are tips that I hope somehow guide you in your decision-making process to either like get into the hobby first, or maybe you just got your first Porsche and you're thinking about how do you get the most out of it. I appreciate you sticking around. I'm out of here.